The restaurant staff made my autistic daughter eat off the floor until the owner walked out. I want to tell you about the Sunday afternoon when this happened, because the hour we spent in that restaurant changed something about how my family moves through the world. My daughter's name is Rose. She is 7. She is autistic. She has specific sensory needs around eating that I have been managing for 7 years in the specific competent way of mothers who have children with specific needs and have learned how to negotiate public spaces. We had been going to this restaurant for almost 2 years. It was a family restaurant with a warm atmosphere and a specific booth in the back corner where we always sat because the booth was against a wall and Rose needed the wall to manage the ambient noise. The staff knew us. Our usual server Janet had learned Rose over 2 years, not because I sat her down with instructions, but because Janet paid attention. She learned to ask Rose one question at a time and wait. She learned that Rose did not like the check placed on the table while she was still eating because it made her feel rushed. Janet started holding the check until I made eye contact. Nobody told her to do that. Janet just noticed. That is the kind of thing that takes 2 years to build. Most restaurants I had to do the work before we even sat down. Find the host, explain that my daughter is autistic, explain what that means, explain what might happen, explain what not to do. At this restaurant we could just walk in. Rose could just eat. I could count on one hand the number of places where that was true. This restaurant was maybe the best of those places. That Sunday Rose went straight to her booth like she always did. She sat against the wall. She looked at the menu even though she already knew what she wanted because looking at the menu was part of the routine and the routine mattered. She ordered her usual chicken tenders with the sauce on the side. The tenders came out. They looked right. Rose started eating. Everything was normal. There is a thing that happens in my body when I take Rose to a place that has proven itself safe. The muscles in my back and my neck and my jaw release because I am not scanning the room for problems. I am not watching the server's face for confusion. I am just sitting with my daughter while she eats on a Sunday afternoon. That feeling, a mother whose guard is down because the place earned it, that is what I had in that booth. Janet was not working. 2 new servers were working who I had not seen before. I had not thought much about it. Then there was a loud noise from the kitchen. Something metal hitting something else. Rose's body reacted before her brain did. That is how it works with her. The sound hit her and her hands moved and her right hand went into her plate and a tender and some sauce went onto the floor. A small mess. A tender and some sauce on the tile. Rose went completely still, frozen in that way she gets when something unexpected has happened, and she is trying to figure out the rules for what comes next. I said, Rose, it is okay. We will ask for another one. I started to get up for napkins. This was a small, manageable moment. I had handled so much worse. This was nothing. I was halfway out of the booth when one of the new servers came over. Her name tag said Brittany. She looked at the floor. She said, we have a policy. If food goes on the floor, the guest has to pick it up. I stopped moving. I said, the guest is 7 years old. Brittany did not blink. She said, I understand, but the policy is the policy. The other server came over. Name tag said Morgan. She said, what is the issue? She looked at the floor. She looked at Rose. She said, yeah, our policy is the guest picks it up. I said, your policy is a 7-year-old child gets down on the floor of a restaurant and picks up food she dropped? Morgan said, I did not say eat it. I said, you said pick it up. What was she going to do with a chicken tender off the floor? Morgan said, put it on her plate. I said, you want my 7-year-old to put a chicken tender she dropped on the floor back onto her plate? Morgan said, those are our rules. I said, who is your manager? Morgan said, on Sundays we do not have a manager on site. I said, there is no one in charge? She said, the owner is here. He is in the back. I said, could you get him? She said, he is busy. I said, I am asking you to get him. She said, I will ask him when he has a moment. She did not move. Neither of them moved. They stood on either side of the booth like 2 people who had made a decision together and were going to wait for it to be carried out. The decision was that a 7-year-old girl was going to get down on the floor and pick up a chicken tender with her hands. That was what they were waiting for. 1 second, I was a mother whose guard was down in a place that had earned 2 years of trust. The next second, I was standing in a confrontation I had never imagined I would need to prepare for. Not here, not at this restaurant, not in Rose's booth. Rose was frozen. She was sitting with her hands in her lap looking at the tender on the floor, and then looking at me, and then looking at the tender again. She did not know the rules for this situation. Nothing in her experience had prepared her for 2 adults standing at her table telling her she needed to get on the floor. Her chin was doing the thing it does before she cries. Her eyes were getting wet, and she was fighting it. She was fighting the crying with everything she had because Rose had been working for a long time on not crying in public. Crying in public produced a specific kind of attention she could not handle. People look at her, people come closer, people ask questions, people touch her shoulder, and every one of those things makes it worse. So she had learned at 7 years old to hold the crying inside and push it down and keep her face still. My 7-year-old daughter had coping mechanisms that were bigger than they should have to be for a child her age, and she was using them right now while 2 strangers stood over her. Being the mother of an autistic child in a public crisis means you perform calm while everything inside you is screaming. You keep your voice low because your child is calibrating off you. If your face says we are fine, then Rose believes we are fine. If your face says something is wrong, then Rose feels that wrongness in her whole body, and it takes hours to bring her back. I leaned across the table. I said, Rose, do not touch the tender on the floor. We are going to sit here until this is fixed. You are not in trouble. Nothing is your fault. Rose said, okay, 1 word, quiet, brave. That word cost her something, and I knew it. A woman 2 tables over stood up. She had been watching the whole thing. She walked toward our table and looked directly at the servers and said, excuse me, I have been watching this for a few minutes. Are you actually asking that child to eat off the floor? Morgan said, we are asking her to pick up what she dropped. The woman said, she is a child. Get the owner. Get him right now. She was not asking. She had moved past asking. Something passed between the servers in a look. Morgan turned and walked toward the kitchen. A minute later, a man came out. He was about 60, wiping his hands on a towel, pulling it through his fingers as he walked like a man who had just stepped away from something hot and was not happy about being interrupted on a busy Sunday. He had the tired expression of an owner who had been running a restaurant for longer than most people stay in one career. He came to our table. He said, hello, I am Marco. I am the owner. What is going on? Morgan spoke first. She stepped forward and said, the guest dropped food and did not pick it up. up and the mother is upset. I want you to hear what Morgan did with those words. She made Rose the person who had done something. She made me the person being difficult. In one sentence, she flipped the whole thing so that Marco would see an angry mother making a fuss and a server doing her job. The woman from 2 tables over was faster than I was. She said, that is not what happened. She said, I watched the whole thing. Your servers came to this table and told this woman's daughter she needed to pick up food she dropped off the floor. The girl is 7. She is autistic. She dropped the food because a noise from the kitchen scared her. The mother told your servers her daughter was not going to get on the floor. Your servers did not listen. They stood here at this table, both of them, and they waited for a 7-year-old to get down on the floor and pick up a chicken tender with her hands. The mother asked for a manager. They said there was none on Sundays. The mother asked for the owner. They said you were busy. They did not go get you. They stood here. I had to tell them to get you. Marco listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood very still. Then he looked at Rose. He really looked at her, not a glance. The kind of look where you actually see the person in front of you. He saw a 7-year-old with her hands in her lap and her chin trembling and her eyes wet. He looked at the chicken tender still sitting on the floor. The small mess on the tile that 2 grown women had decided was worth standing over a child for. He looked at Morgan. He looked at Brittany. He looked at each of them long enough that they both looked away. Then Marco took a breath. I have thought about that breath many times since. It was not frustration. It was the breath of a man who had specific feelings about what had just been described to him, and those feelings were big, and he was choosing, deliberately, not to let them out in the dining room in front of a 7-year-old who was already scared. He was going to hold those feelings for a different room. The 2 people who were going to be in that room with him were standing right behind him. He turned to me. He said, ma'am, I am so sorry. This is not a policy at this restaurant. There is no such policy at this restaurant. I do not know where my servers have gotten this from, but it is not from me. I am going to fix this right now. There was no but, no defense, no, let me look into it, no attempt to split the blame. He said it was not a policy. He said there was no such policy. And then 5 words that mattered more than all the others. I am going to fix this right now. Marco knelt down next to the booth. He was at Rose's height. He said, Rose, I am so sorry this happened. It was not your fault. This restaurant is going to take care of you. I am going to get you a new plate and a drink on the house and a dessert on the house. Is that okay? Something shifted in Rose's face when he said her name, when he said it was not her fault, when he was down at her level instead of standing over her the way the other 2 had been. She said, yes. Marco pulled a rag from his pocket. He got down and cleaned the tender and the sauce off the floor himself. He threw it away. He walked to the kitchen. He came out a few minutes later with a plate of chicken tenders, a dish of vanilla ice cream, and a chocolate milkshake. He set all 3 in front of Rose. He said, the tenders are on the house. The ice cream is on the house. The milkshake is on the house. You take as much time as you want. He turned to Morgan and Brittany. His voice was calm. The calm of a man who had a lot of things to say and was going to say every one of them in a room with a door that closed. He said, both of you, come with me to my office. Before he left, the woman from 2 tables over said to Rose, you are a good girl. You did nothing wrong. You have good manners. Your mother is a good mother. Rose said, thank you. We finished the meal. Rose ate her tenders and her ice cream and drank her milkshake. She was shaken. She was okay. The next morning, Marco called. He said he got my number from the reservation system. He said he had terminated both servers. He said they told him the policy came from another restaurant they had both worked at previously. He said, that policy does not exist at my restaurant. I do not care if it exists at other restaurants. It does not exist at mine. He invited us back for a full meal on the house. I said, Marco, you already made this right. You came out of the kitchen and cleaned the tender off the floor yourself. You spoke to Rose at her height. You made her feel like she was a guest at your restaurant and not a problem. That was the fixing. He said, please let me do it anyway. I said, okay. Then he said something that changed the whole shape of the story. He said, my brother is autistic. His name is Ashok. He is 54. He has been autistic my entire life. I know what it looks like when someone with autism gets startled. I saw Rose yesterday, and I knew what had happened. I also knew what my servers had done. He said, I want you to know that I understood your daughter. I want her to know that some restaurants will understand her. Some will not. Mine does. Marco was not just being a good restaurant owner. He was being a brother. Ashok's whole life, 54 years of it, had taught Marco something no training could teach. What it looks like when a person with autism gets scared. How to kneel down and talk to a little girl at her height and mean every word. That something had walked out of the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon and cleaned a chicken tender off the floor and set ice cream in front of my daughter and spoken her name like she was a person who mattered. We went back. Rose had her dinner on the house. Marco came out of the kitchen and sat with her for 5 minutes. He asked about her favorite things. She told him. He told her about Ashok. She asked if Ashok could come to the restaurant too sometimes. Marco said he did sometimes. He said he would tell Ashok about Rose. We have been back 14 times since. Marco always comes out when we arrive. He always sits with Rose for 5 minutes. He always asks her a question from the last time, which tells her he has been remembering. Rose tells her friends at school about him. She tells her teachers. She says, Marco is my restaurant friend. He has an autistic brother. Some restaurants understand. She is learning from Marco that some places in the world are going to be the place where she does not have to explain anything, and a person like Marco is going to come out of the kitchen and fix it. I think that is the most important thing she could learn. I think Marco knows it too. I think Ashok taught him. I think the chain of teaching continues. I think that is what a good restaurant is for.